The king lay in his bed, wrapped from neck to toe in linen soaked in brandy. The treatment was supposed to heal him. Instead, it set him on fire, and as the flames burned out, something far worse began. His body started rotting while he was still alive. You're about to hear the true story of Charles the Bad, a medieval king so feared and hated that even his allies called him treacherous. In an age when kings ruled with iron fists and betrayal was as common as bread, Charles managed to stand out, not for his bravery, not for his victories, but for the sheer depth of his deceit. If there was a line between politics and treachery, he didn't just cross it, he erased it. Born into privilege as the King of Navarre in the 14th century, Charles inherited more than just a crown. He had an appetite for power. Navarre was small compared to its powerful neighbors, France, Castile, and England, but Charles played these kingdoms against each other like a gambler stacking cards. He could smile and shake your hand at a feast, then plot your downfall. Before the wine had cooled in his cup, even among royalty, a class not exactly known for honesty, Charles earned his Rhydnignos, the Bad. He was not the kind of man who made one or two enemies in his lifetime. He made them constantly, in every direction. Kings, queens, dukes, even members of his own family learned the same bitter truth. Trusting Charles was like holding a snake and hoping it wouldn't bite. And yet somehow he kept surviving. War broke out between England and France, the 100 Years' War, and Charles used the chaos to his advantage. He played both sides, taking gold and promises from one king, then secretly conspiring with the other. He would sell a secret, betray an ally, and twist the knife with a smile. This wasn't carelessness, it was strategy. The more people feared and distrusted him, the more unpredictable he became. And in medieval politics, unpredictability was a weapon, but every weapon has a cost. Charles's betrayals piled up like bodies on a battlefield. Eventually, his enemies stopped trying to outwit him. They wanted him gone, permanently. Still, removing a king, even one as hated as Charles, wasn't simple. You couldn't just walk into his court and kill him without starting a war. And so, the years dragged on. Assassination attempts failed. Peace treaties fell apart. Charles grew older, but not softer. If anything, he became sharper, more suspicious, more paranoid. It was that paranoia and a sudden illness that set the stage for one of the most grotesque royal deaths in history. Late in his reign, Charles began to suffer from a mysterious sickness. Some say it was dropsy, a condition that made his body swell painfully. Others believed it was the result of poison, perhaps from one of the many enemies he had made. Whatever the cause, the proud and cunning king was reduced to a man in constant discomfort, desperate for relief. Medieval medicine was a dangerous mix of superstition, guesswork, and occasional skill. Kings could summon the best physicians money could buy, but best didn't always mean safe. For Charles, it meant submitting to bizarre treatments involving herbs, poultices, and, in his final days, a full-body wrap of linen soaked in brandy. His doctors swore it would heal him, draw out the sickness, and restore his strength. The king agreed. What he didn't know was that this so-called cure would instead become the instrument of his destruction. One cold night, the attendants followed the physician's orders. They wrapped Charles from his neck to his feet in bandages drenched with strong alcohol. It was meant to be tightened, then stitched shut so he could sleep in the treatment overnight. But somewhere between the physician's orders and the attendant's execution, disaster struck. One servant, perhaps tired from the long task, decided to cut the final stitch with a candle in hand. The flame caught the brandy-soaked linen, and in an instant, the king was burning alive in his own bed. You can imagine the panic, The shouts, the rush for water, the sickening smell of burning flesh. Charles survived the flames, but barely, and worse, the damage was catastrophic. His wounds festered, infections spread. Over the next days, the king, once feared across Europe, began to rot while still alive. Every breath was agony, every movement tore at scorched flesh. The man who had outwitted kings and played nations like pawns was now trapped in a bed, his own body betraying him in a way no enemy could have planned better. That's the ending you'll hear in full detail later. But before we get there, you have to understand the man behind it all, because Charles's death was not just a freak accident. It was the perfect, twisted conclusion to a life built on manipulation, ambition, and betrayal. His bend was a mirror of his life, brutal, messy, and unforgettable. To understand why the death of Charles the Bad was more celebrated than mourned, you have to see the problem he created. A problem so big it stretched across kingdoms, fueled wars, and turned even his own allies into enemies. Charles II of Navarre came to power in 1349, inheriting a small but strategically important kingdom. Wedged between France and Spain, Navarre didn't have the wealth of France, the military of Castile, or the sprawling territories of England, but it had something even more valuable: location. Navarre was like a chessboard square that both black and white wanted to control, and Charles, he knew it. From his earliest days on the throne, Charles saw himself not as the ruler of a small state, but as a player in the great game of European politics. He believed he deserved more than Navarre, much more. Through his mother, he had a claim to the French throne itself. That claim was weak by legal standards, but in the chaos of the 100 Years' War, a weak claim could become a dangerous weapon if used well, and Charles was very, very good at using dangerous weapons. The challenge for Charles was simple. How do you turn a small, vulnerable kingdom into a launching pad for power? His answer was to play every side at once. One year, he'd align himself with the French king. The next, he'd secretly negotiate with England, promising them alliances and support. At the same time, he'd meddle in Castilian politics to keep his southern neighbor off balance. On paper, this was brilliant. In reality, it meant that no one could ever trust him, not even the people he was supposed to be loyal to. The French called him Charles the Bad. For a reason. This wasn't a name given by his enemies alone. It was a nickname whispered by those who sat at his own table. He had a gift for smiling in your face while he plotted behind your back. In 1356, when the French king, John II, was captured by the English at the Battle of Poitiers, Charles saw opportunity. He maneuvered himself into power in parts of France, presenting himself as a patriot, ready to defend the kingdom. But behind the scenes, he was cutting deals with the English for his own gain. The problem wasn't just his shifting loyalties. It was that Charles treated politics like personal revenge. If you crossed him, he wouldn't just defeat you on the battlefield. He'd humiliate you, strip you of your dignity, and make sure everyone knew about it. He poisoned enemies. Literally, he spread false rumors to break alliances. He used marriage proposals as bait, then pulled them away at the last moment, leaving insult and bitterness behind. Over time, this created a dangerous kind of isolation. Diplomacy depends on trust, or at least the illusion of it. Charles destroyed that illusion wherever he. The kings of France and England both kept him close at times, but never too close. His own nobles followed his orders out of fear, not loyalty. Even in Navarre, his popularity sank. And when a ruler is feared but not loved, The day they show weakness is the day everyone moves against them. Wall. But Charles wasn't stupid. He understood the precariousness of his position. That's why he built layers of protection, fortresses, alliances of convenience, even secret arrangements with mercenary companies who could be called upon if the tide turned against him. These precautions kept him alive for decades in one of the most dangerous political landscapes in history. But they also made him overconfident. Here's the real challenge. Charles believed he could outplay everyone forever. The 100 Years' War was a marathon of shifting alliances, broken treaties, and sudden betrayals. And he thought he could be the one constant winner. What he didn't realize was that every betrayal left a scar, and those scars were adding up. By the time he reached his 50s, he had created a long list of people who would rather see him dead than see him win again. One of his boldest and most reckless moves came in the late 1350s when he organized a rebellion in Paris against the French crown. It was a daring gamble, and for a moment it seemed to work. But like many of Charles's schemes, it collapsed under the weight of his own ambition. The rebellion failed, his position in France weakened, and his enemies took note. Charles could be beaten. From that point on, he was no longer the untouchable schemer he thought he was. He was a marked man. Charles the Bad's life was a study in ambition without restraint. He was cunning enough to manipulate kings, ruthless enough to crush rivals, and greedy enough to betray anyone, even supposed allies, if it served his interests. For decades, he thrived in the chaos of medieval politics, playing France, England, and Castile against each other. But the same threat that brought him power also planted the seeds of his downfall. In the end, his enemies didn't need to plot a grand assassination or wage a costly war. Fate, or perhaps irony, handed them a slower, more humiliating victory. A single accident during a questionable medical treatment reduced the most feared man in Navarre to a provision failing body. His reign ended not with a dramatic final battle, but with the slow, relentless march of decay. And maybe that's why his story endures, because it shows that even in an age of swords and armies, the most dangerous weapon can be time itself. Charles the Bad tried to control everyone around him, but in the end, he couldn't even control his own death.